After 2 weeks of traveling through the warp, we reached the Forge Triplex Fell to find it in great upheaval. 1,000 of asteroids dragged in concentric circles around the shipyards and the Forge world itself, perhaps a dozen conveyors being refitted as fleet carriers, and a second battleship nearly completed. It was even being plated over with blackstone, just like I was doing for nearly every vehicle and ship, even the Astartes armor. The stuff was incredibly resilient, to be fair, more so than ceramite and even adamantium, although not as easy to work with, since we could only mine it, not manufacture this material. Anyway, I was glad to see at least the Ultima Segmentum forges adapting to produce better products, after stagnating and even decaying for 10,000 years. Sure, perhaps the sudden decrease in Chaos, Eldar and Dark Eldar incursions and raids helped as well, and the looming threat of the Tyranids and the sudden awakening of more Necron tomb worlds also contributed to the frenetic activity. Pef Lancefire, we owe you much, but everything you see in orbit is being requisitioned by the Defender Rias Crusade. I can give you no ships, the Fabricator declared loudly after glancing at Inquisitor Vale for a second. A cruiser in the next decade, if you come alone. Another message followed on my implant. I didn't even come to ask for ships. But sure, another cruiser will be nice. So I just smiled patiently, and held out my own gift, a data slate with the Tarantula drop pods, the modified light cruiser for inserting them, and a dozen templates for Sentinels, both piloted and autonomous. You might have heard I have taken charge of the Lamentus chapter, Fabricator. The chapter might lack battle brothers right now, but we did our duty anyway, with sentry turrets and auxiliary regiments. I hope our combat testing at Perlia will prove sufficient, as these war machines have bested Anorqua with little difficulty. I explained while the Archmagos perused the templates and the combat records attached. He powered up his cogitator and measured the Silent Inquisitor again, as if looking for my confirmation. A massive orbital drop, followed by a landing of mechanized and armored troops. Even 100 Doomblades and some Fellblades. Your auxiliary forces seem strong enough, perhaps too strong, Chapter Master. The Fabricator commented with some surprise. He was right, of course. I would always prefer some armor between enemy fire and my soldiers, because even light tanks and sentinels had 10 times more armor than a grenadier in carapace armor. Sadly, Forge World Antax could not figure out how to connect the pod retro thrusters to the turret's power cells, and thus the energy for laser guns is limited, compensated with larger numbers. Heavy bolter turrets or autocannons would run out of ammunition even faster. As for other options like plasma guns and flamers, the technology is fragile anyway, and would not survive the high G-forces of an orbital drop, I said calmly and examined the trading goods with a raised eyebrow. It seemed they had already begun producing my own designs of Macarius pattern tanks, mostly the Volcano Lance and the Plasma Blastgun variants. The Plasma Blastgun variant even had atomantic reactors instead of the classic plasma reactor. That allowed supporting flare shields and increased rate of fire, plus nigh unlimited mobility. You may select anything your chapter needs, Lord Lancefire. For the Sons of Omnissiah, everything we can do, we will do. The Fabricator announced in a proud tone, and he spewed some scented incense and a barrage of tetragrammic prayers in Binharik. Yes, you will tech priest. But right now, we are in need of munitions to halt Hive Fleet Moloch in the galactic north. Torpedoes, missiles and Nova shells. Show me everything you have in storage, Ambly demanded in a harsh tone, her left hand revealing her rosette for a millisecond. Without commenting, the Fabricator began lighting up more holofield screens, with inventories of capital-class munitions. I could only gawk at the immense stores available to a big Forge world. Where could they even keep all this? For starters, I shall requisition torpedoes, 200 atmospheric incendiaries, and 20 vortex warheads. Then 1,000 melter warheads, and 400.000 plasma warheads. As for Nova shells, I think most of them. 4,600 Nova shells, and you'll have 97 remaining to resupply the Victory battleship's holding station in orbit. I will need 4,000 of these Nova shells modified for my Mu implant's trigger and detonation. And lastly, 8 million crack missiles and 2,000 vortex missiles. Hopefully it will be enough, I demanded in a shameless voice. Then again, it was a damn high fleet. It will probably won't be enough. My 2 carriers could unload 2,000 corvettes, and those will only have 10 shots with their cells of torpedoes and missiles. That's why I needed more Nova shells to thin the ranks of the incoming bugs, to more manageable levels. This will delay fully arming the Segmentum's battle fleet carriers for a decade or maybe 2. Primarch Guliman will not be pleased. The fabricator warned me as his stores of torpedoes dropped in the red. The carriers can move, Tech Priest. Have them sent to Metallica or Anvilis to load with torpedoes. Anything else you need from this forge, Lord Lancefire? My dear Inquisitor asked while dismissing the fabricator's complaints. One of these Navy carriers, loaded only with Fury interceptors, with their flight crew and engineers support. I think we could fit about 8,000 of these starfighters easily. And then, a dozen Navy cruisers armed with Nova cannons and a dozen light cruisers refitted for orbital pod drops. The defense fleet should have at least 200 escorts, for orbital support and interceptions of flying creatures and lander spore pods. Mostly armed with energy-based weapons, if possible. The new drop cruisers shall be remitted to my Lamentor's chapter, if and when this hive fleet is defeated. There are more planets out there in the fringe that will need to be reconquered, I concluded in a thoughtful voice. Well, the Lamentors were in theory a fleet-based chapter, and once we had a full complement we could start attacking and conquering anything we found in the eastern fringe, while the rogue trader dynasty would benefit by absorbing those conquered planets and star systems into our domain. The fabricator general measured me for a long minute, then nodded slowly. We will need a year to prepare everything to your needs, Lord Lancefire. And the Lady Inquisitor better have an ear to her superiors, or this plan of yours might fall apart, just like Inquisitor's Cryptman plan did. You will not need Astra Militarum guardsmen for this? I would expect at least 100 regiments for an operation on this scale. I sighed inward while considering the offer. Generally, most Imperial Guard regiments would be poorly supplied and poorly trained, and would not help much when the horizon was filled with moving fields of Tyranids' biological war engines. However, a dozen armor regiments, and 50 artillery regiments, those could make a big difference. If anything, the Imperial Guard could hold ground quite well. Moving and maneuvering was a different issue of course. I went to change the holofield screen myself, checking the stores for hydras and basilisks. Hey, they even had las cannon sentinels in stock. I will take all of them. We will take 50 regiments of Valhallan artillery, 10 of Cadian armor, and 40 of Katakan infantry. Of course they don't have air interceptors, so we will need extra 10,000 Hydra anti-air and 5,000 Basilisk mobile artillery platforms. Plus all of these 8,700 sentinels. It only comes out about 200 sentinels per frontline regiments, but it must be enough. It's better than they had anyway. Oh, and STC's containers with supplies for all of them, triple ammunition loadout. Enough tech priests and acolytes for all the extra holy machines and a million servitors to help around. I allowed after reviewing the better Imperial regiments in my mind. Amberly glanced at me as if trying to object to something, then sighed softly. You better not fail, Lord Lancefire. It might ruin my career. I grinned with confidence. Have no fear, Lady Vale. We are what they fear. I quipped in a cheerful voice, then held my hand out to the fabricator. Always a pleasure and an honor to meet the brightest of the cult Mechonicus, fabricator. When your next battleship dock gets free, let me know and I'll bring an old ironclad for refit here. The Margus just nodded as it was only natural and shook my glove with a mechanical one. You're not too bad yourself, Pef Lancefire. Try not to die too soon. The Mechonicus has great plans for you. Well, wasn't that ominous at all? Then again, I did kinda lift an entire segmentum with my own shoulders. Those fabricator geniuses might have begun to notice, perhaps. Perhaps, when the time is right there will be a new High Lord seat, for the rogue traders. Not until his son takes the sword though. I proposed in a level voice, then turned around and left, with the pretty blonde Inquisitor at my side. The same day, I used the Astropathic Choir to request the Tranquility battleship and the Daedalus carrier to be sent here, while Amberly began sending her own messages to various Astra Militarum regiments to summon them here for a small crusade. And then, I could only hurry up and wait, and copy Jurgen's example by impregnating a few concubines every day. Also train my body with Captain Khan and study and work beside Felicia on a dozen STC templates, with slightly better results. As time passed, More and more ships began gathering, first an Iron Hands strike cruiser, then a White Scars battle barge with some escorts, then the regiments on their troop transports, and lastly my daughter Andrea with her Mars battlecruiser and the Daedalus, plus all the frigates of my Lancefire dynasty. All 6 of them. Dad. I named my battlecruiser Prayer for the Vanquished. And the machine spirit loves it. Andrea explained in a jubilant voice, while holding a baby in her arms. I glanced at her chosen husband, a Katakan named Sly_Marbo, who was rather famous and infamous at the same time. Excellent news, sweetie. Ugly husband you have found for yourself. I commented wryly, and kissed her and the blank grandchild in greeting, and saw with my helmet-picked cam the Katakan glare at me for a second. Well, he was rather ugly, but not everyone had angel genes. Plus Mr. Marbo would make a decent commander for my special ops group. Hey, Sly has good parts too. Look what a nice boy he gave me. Andrea replied with an appreciating look at her husband who smiled proudly. He probably beat up 100 other Katakans to win Andrea's hand and favor, just like I've taught my girls to demand. Only the best survival genes, as all my descendants were rather angelic in their looks anyway. Come with me, Sly. I guess I can give you a major rank and leave you in charge of the Special Ops Command. Your job will be to cause disruption and misery behind enemy lines, and you'll have whatever means my house can provide. I just want results. I explained in a teasing voice. He would love a free hand to cause destruction, no doubt. The grizzly veteran blinked in surprise at my offer. That sounds like excellent news to me. I won't let you down, father-in-law. The man spoke in a gruff tone, like he wasn't used talking at all. I smiled inward and considered giving him a chronoblade. It might be too much even for this 40k universe. Sly was a walking storm of disaster anyway. Oh well. Andrea would be sad if Sly died, so he will never die. In a minute, I reached my chapter master quarters aboard the Serenity, and let Sly get familiar with the place, and inspect all the weapons and artifacts placed on the walls. I did have plenty of relics to show off, and a mountain of them in my tesseract. Amberly was already waiting in her armchair, sipping tea and spinning tarot cards to read possible timelines. Offer the Inquisitor your hand, Major, I demanded after powering up my cogitator and selecting 100 items on a list, all useful for infiltration, sabotage and outright murder. Sly Marbo hesitated for a second, before nodding and offering a hand for inspection. Ouch. Not only I can't read him, his touch makes me feel sick. The blonde Inquisitor exclaimed in a thin voice, obviously in pain. See, Major. That's why you had to work alone, and couldn't have friends or family till now. You're an untouchable, or better said a psychic blank. 1 in a trillion people are born with this gift, much rarer than psychers. I announced in a patient tone, while Amberly wiped her hand in disgust. I know. The big Katakan soldier muttered and then lit himself a thick cigar, dragging from it with satisfaction. Amberly fled the room, after glaring at Sly Marbo in outrage. Amberly is pregnant and doesn't like smoke. Even holy incense makes her sick. My own gift is milder, although I did send a psycho girl screaming to the floor at a ball. Inquisitors are made of sterner stuff, because they need to be, I continued as my bodyguard Rafen leaned back on his plasteel dais and started cleaning his power sword with scented oil and plying the machine spirit of the weapon with twirling swirls of blue smoke and low-voice litanies. Sly observed the ritual curios, and then dragged from his foul cigar with a careless shrug. Never cared for that Mechonicus crap. Never needed them either. The man commented in a superior tone, and walked around to stare at the proposed list of infernal devices. Some of these rituals are indeed useless, others are recharge and maintenance protocols, regular security password checkups and purity seals against warp entities. The Lamenters know this very well, especially when their own weapons explode in their hands, or entire warships vanish in warp storms and freak accidents. Blanks are much less bothered by demons and warp-based curses, up to being immune or even inimical to demons that they can banish them with mere proximity. That last category is called pariah, a trait developed by the Emperor himself into the Silent Sisters genome. I explained softly, and turned my hand to reveal a psych-out grenade obtained by grinding pariah bones into dust, while the cogitator holoscreen selected the weapon and revealed the weapon's capabilities. Sly examined and possibly memorized the parameters of his new toy. We should make millions of these grenades, he demanded in a practical tone. They do make millions of them. On Luna and Terra, maybe Mars too. Catch blanks and pariahs men, and grind their bones into anti-demon dust. Or boil them alive in red-hot iron to make phase iron when the death echoes imprint into the metal. Neurons and nerves extracted for blank machine spirits, to make titans immune to demons and corruption. And it's possible worse for the sisters, and definitely worse for the brainwashed Culexus assassins. I hear only 1 in 1,000 passes the trials. Their corpses are still very useful after all. I mused while watching the man nearly crush the phase iron grenade in his hand. I see. Perhaps we should not make millions of these grenades. Blank soldiers and officers are immune to this chaos bullshit, right? The Katakan brute proposed in a more level tone. I nodded gently. Already working on that, as you saw with dear Andrea. I have 1,000 concubines and so will you, and any other blank man we find. And we'll keep our family secret in the Eastern Fringe, till we have enough numbers. Trillions of blanks and armies of pariahs. Thus, you're hereby forbidden to die, not until you have 1,000 blank children. I ordered with a thin smile. Sly grunted as if hit with a Terminator fist in the stomach. It shall be so, Lord Lancefire. But I'm not good with women, he admitted in a shy voice. Doesn't matter. I might pass on to you my current Katakan concubines, at least those with a foul mouth and demanding a real man. I added with a wry grin. Just smack, I mean. I shall take them off your shoulders, father-in-law. You're too pretty for a real man anyway. Sly Marbo quipped and grinned with an ugly smile. I didn't mind smack talk about my angelic face, I did that every day to my mirror. But not my kids. A bolter pistol appeared in my hand and I tapped his progenitor glands with it. You smack my dear daughter once, I shoot 1 ball off. You smack her twice, it's your head, clear? I asked in a pleasant voice. His smile vanished as he glanced at the weapon that just appeared in my hand. Loud and clear, sir. Very useful ability, to carry extra munitions in the field. He observed in a professional voice. I carried more than munitions in there. A lot more. I shall try to obtain a small dimensional pocket for your use, Major. They are just extremely expensive, like all ancient relics. Until then, you have a month to organize a company of special ops troops, with anything you saw here, and perhaps more. Automated turrets and sentinels, dropships, dropods, a stealth dropship even. You will also all need mind implants, and perhaps power armor to carry larger loads. Deck 4 is reserved for you and this unit, so get started, I commanded, curious what he will do with a free hand. I mean, this guy liberated entire worlds by himself, even took down scores of Chaos Marines and a Chaos Titan. Most of his military records were sealed, even for me, so I could only make educated guesses about his real abilities. And, perhaps Trazin did have a ship-sized labyrinth in his collection, to carry demolition ordnance and other supplies. They would be much easier to make, than a tesseract able to cover a solar system. Raffen coughed as Sly Marbo left the room, and held his own psych-out grenade in a silent question. We will still use the weapons, Raffen. We won't let their deaths be in vain. But there will be a time for reckoning, one day. You can bet a throne on that. I muttered in a cold voice. The veteran nodded and stored the grenade back on his combat harness. There is nothing to bet, my lord. In a few decades, there were thousands of blank Astartes. And the Primarchs were contemporaries of the Silent Sisters on Terra. They fought beside them from Mars to Prospero. The debt will never be forgotten, he declared in a certain voice. I wasn't so sure. Primarchs could be too pragmatic sometimes, even with the deaths of their sons, not mention other people unrelated to them. Then again, those Astartes' sons were merely imprinted with gene seeds, not their birth children. Not like mine. From this meeting I went to meet with the regiment commanders and organize the land armies for deployment, held in the largest meeting hall on the battle barge. It was no surprise to see 100 colonels and a few generals already at each other's throats, while commissars and sanctioned psychers stood watch just as their bodyguards and while aides and lex mechanics and autosavants were often called to explain certain logistic problems or solve a dispute who deserved what munitions. The Katakan's colonels were way more reserved, probably surprised they were even invited to such an august meeting, even those of noble origin. They had no autosavants, and few lex mechanics, but they had Ogren bodyguards, which leveled the odds in their favor. I even recalled meeting one smart Ogren bodyguard back on Forge Riser, still guarding General Grease. The Katakan's 2nd Regiment was now commanded by Colonel Strachan, loaded on the carrier Daedalus at Forge Tigris. The Inquisitor stood on a high dais, flanked by her new Death Watch Guardians, all wearing ominous blank armor without any insignia at all, beside the Inquisitorial seal. They were already dead, and the Inquisitor will decide where to spend their deaths. Nothing more. No chapter, no honor, not for them. Attention everyone. Be silent. Bodyguards wait outside, you're all safe in my presence. I boomed using the room's voxcasters at maximum power, making everyone not protected stumble and sway from shock. The ore will come later. Ludvius hefted his power maul on his shoulder, ready to enforce my order. On the side, I saw Lord Commissar Kane slump in defeat at my presence, while a dozen priests from the Adeptum Ministorum all began vociferating and threatening me with sanctions. Oi, you heard the Emperor's son. Out. Nork D-Dog, the big Ogren yelled and began waving his big automatic shotgun at the other bodyguards. Most of the escorts started to trickle out, while I waited patiently. A crusade wouldn't work easily, not from the start. Then one higher-rank priest started raising his staff and praying loudly and asking me to repent, and he vanished somewhere. Ludvius, start breaking the heads of any insubordinate traitors, I commanded as the entire room stared at me in awe. As the Blood Angel veteran hefted his weapon and made it glow and hum, by powering up the energy field, dissent turned into panic and the delegations started running towards the exit, while pleading to be let out faster. I saw only 3 women among the regiment commanders, an older woman called Rayla_Van, then 2 prettier ones from Valhalla, named Janet_Sulla and Regina_Castine. General Van was in command of 3 Cadian armor regiments, all dispatched from the fortress World of Spite, guarding the Hadex Anomaly Rift. Well, I did kinda burn pretty much everything of strategic importance for chaos in the area, so they would be available now. As for the other 2, they were the Colonel Castine and her aide Major Sulla, commanding the 296th all-female Valhallan Artillery Regiment, which was very promising, for my own needs. Sly and Ferric_Jurgen could have all the Katakan concubines they could find. I really liked the Norse features of these Valhallan women. We're going to fight Tyranids, more exactly Hive Fleet Moloch, which is attacking the Imperium from the north. It's possible everyone here will die very soon for the Emperor, while eaten alive and crying in pain. Everyone, but not the good Commissar Kane over there, as the Emperor watches over him for some reason. I explained in a half-serious voice, while 1,000 eyes locked on the cowardly Commissar with curious eyes. I think I saw Kane swallow his tears for a second. For those of you who never fought against the Tyranids, you should expect the horizon to be filled with giant bugs, on the ground, in the air and in orbit. Trillions of them. Stubber weaponry will not bother them at all, and most of the guards' infantry weapons will be minimally effective, I concluded in the ominous silence. I saw all the generals and officers nod glumly at my description. Then Major Sulla raised her eyes to look at me. We will die for the Emperor, Lord Lancefire. But perhaps, we might be given more weapons? She asked in a calm voice, as if expecting to be punished. I smiled gently and turned on the central hologram projector. More weapons, yes. For now, I've managed to requisition 5,000 basilisks and 10,000 hydras with extra ammunition. Thus, every regiment will have 100 hydras each, while the artillery regiments will receive 100 guns more. The infantry regiments will also receive 200 sentinel walkers, and some automated tarantula turrets. As for armor, there are 200 Lehman Russ tanks and 100 Makarov tanks available to be spread among the regiments. At need, the Lamenters will deploy our auxiliary regiments and provide drop pods with turrets and supplies. But, most of my efforts will be focused on stopping the bugs in the void. Once they manage to land, the Tyranids will devour any biomass and reproduce rapidly, growing in numbers 100 times. I explained in a level voice, waiting for someone to crack. Reality was harsh in this 40k universe, and it will get much worse. General Van glanced at the hologram, showing the nice Makarov tanks in all their glory. More tanks are great, my lord. But I already have 300 tanks in my regiments, and even double that, it won't be enough. Surely there will be more reinforcements? Well, a normal Cadian armor regiment had 30 Lehman Russ tanks and 5 Hydras. Good enough for minor orc raids and defending a city, but obviously not enough for a big campaign. The armor units were kept in reduced numbers by intent, to prevent them getting too strong in case they went traitor, as they often did. I nodded at her question. There are 700 more Sentinels and a few hundred Taurus and other light vehicles like the Centaurs. However, most of your job will be to simply destroy the Bio-Titans of the Tyranids, and prevent our static positions from being overrun or outflanked. There will be ships in low orbit to provide fire support and some space fighters, plus ground attack craft from the Lamentor auxiliaries. I cannot speak for other Astartes chapters, but I expect a few companies might arrive, just like these Iron Hands and White Scars did. There are some Blood Angels with me, and even some Silent Sisters, but they'll mostly target the psychic leaders of the Tyranids, with deep strikes aimed to disrupt their synaptic links. And if the Katakan infantry regiments accidentally received some containers with artillery shells normally used by the basilisks, well, they did like setting traps and mines. After that, the long task of preparing a logistic chain and supply method began, with the Navy cruisers obliged to load up the extra vehicles and munitions and the tech priests and their servitors, while most vehicles and turrets were being hastily covered with blackstone armor, mostly provided freely from my own reserves that just appeared in empty fighter hangars on the carrier or my barge. In this month, I did manage to strike a friendly relation with Regina, firstly over a working dinner, then a visit to my quarters to show her my trophies and exchange war stories over a few bottles of wine. I bet Regina didn't expect my glands to still work, but she wasn't disappointed at all. Sadly, she had to return on her transport to oversee her troops, but her agent stayed as a liaison with a squad of her own Valhallan guardswomen to feel safe. Well, it was very safe in my bed, that was certain. With good relations thus established, I decided to conscript the entire Valhallan regiment as Lamentor's auxiliaries, both because we lacked a dedicated artillery group, and for the other more obvious advantages of an all-female unit under me. A month later, we arrived at Perimeter and began setting up orbital defenses and ground defenses. However, only 2 regiments were needed here, 1 infantry and 1 artillery. The terrain was broken up into high plateaus, easily defendable. I picked the most green and covered with vegetation plateau, where the city of Conamoil was located. Then I let the Katakans prepare the ground with surprises, including a squad of Special Ops Katakans selected and slightly trained by Slime Arbo. The 276th Valhallan Regiment was moved on board my ship, the Tranquility, the battleship with warpless engines. These brave platinum-haired women wouldn't see much combat on my ship, and they could raise their children in relative safety now. From here, the bulk of the fleet moved outward, reaching Isis_V and preparing stronger defenses here, even landing 5 regiments, including 12th Artillery with Commissar Kane overseeing the defenses. A few smaller fleet departed for Celia and Karak Prime to secure the hive cities there, but mostly to pin the Tyranids in place if they arrived. An armor regiment, 2 infantry and 3 artillery each, plus a cruiser with a Nova cannon. Then we moved onwards, with the roving fleet, reaching the Kilta sector and burning down a dozen worlds already overrun by Tyranids. Exterminatus torpedoes were very useful for that. 100 small-scale void battles ensured we saved most of the sector, with liberal use of teleporting Nova mines, plasma torpedoes and even a vortex torpedo on top of a Hive Queen. It wasn't really difficult, when controlling spatial powers with impunity. As for the planets already under attack, it was triage. We couldn't defend everything, but hive cities, Mechonicus forges, and research stations, important industrial centers, those we could. And every time some priest demanded we defended some empty planet with religious significance, he vanished and wasn't heard again. I did not care at all for shrine worlds, or cardinal worlds or any other type of imperial cult bullshit. Population and industry would allow the Imperium of Man to survive and fight back, while sanctuary worlds or cemetery_worlds were amazingly stupid in my opinion. Given this was 40k, dead people should be burned as soon as possible, and their ashes used to grow plants, to feed the living. Having ashowaries and crypts filled with skeletons would only tempt warp entities or biomass-seeking monsters. Also, precious relics or libraries should be kept on fortress worlds, because they also tempted cults and traitors or demons. Better have guns close to kill them. Wherever possible, I organized such maneuvers, sending the priests away to escort those relics to a fortress world, presumably to boost morale and piousness of the defenders, beside keeping them safe. Guilliman has also begun setting up sentinel worlds, somewhat akin to a factory, fortress and shipyard world, with a reality cage being constructed deep underground. Only a couple of them, probably testing the effects on nearby warp storms like Medusa_V. That world was doomed anyway, so might as well try to save it, even if the means were somewhat unorthodox. And then someone closed the rapidity warp rift, and the installation stayed. And then the astropaths received a message from an agri world called Jolliffe, sent by a frantic Mechonicus tech priest that was studying an STC fragment, but was interrupted by a Tyrannid splinter fleet. I rushed my warpless fleet ahead, heedless of the encroaching silence, and began setting up hasty orbital defenses, and blowing up wave after wave of Tyrannid bioships and landing spores. But the Tyrannids were hungry, and this was an agri world, teeming with biomass. Soon enough, they began ignoring my corvettes and the battleship, diving heedlessly towards the appetizing food source. A single Lamenter drop cruiser managed to make orbit in time, and began dropping turret pods and providing orbital support, while local regiments retreated towards the spaceport. The Death Watch Company covered their retreat with relentless determination, despite being decimated for their actions. Well, the Astartes were the defenders of humanity, clad in mighty armor and armed with the most powerful guns. Still, they shouldn't be wasted. So I began to cheat, kidnapping bio-titans from their spore pods, placing Nova mines in the midst of landed hordes of Tyrannids, while the Blood Angels began landing in the besieged perimeter beside my own auxiliary PDF regiments, including Lord Whitelands and his knight. And then we kept shooting and shooting, corvettes unleashing thousands of torpedoes and missiles, firing their plasma cannons and lances, while the Tranquility did the same, but rarely and quite strongly. Blowing up a dozen bioships per salvo was very fulfilling though. When the other naval forces managed to break through the Tyrannid silence on the real space plasma engines, they found half the planet in flames, and a mountain of Tyrannid corpses around the spaceport. It only took a single week, and I already had to resupply my corvettes from my pocket a few times. And I even lost a couple of corvettes, although not the crew. Corvettes may be cheap and easy to replenish, but good crew was not, and especially not my family. Soon enough, the perimeter was cleared and corpses burned, and then the armor regiments began attacking, with mobile infantry engaging stragglers and lurking organisms, hidden in swamps or rivers and lakes. 3 squads of Special Ops and the Blood Angels took over the task of locating and destroying the lictors and lurkers, while space fighters and low-orbit frigates cleaned the skies. Even Captain Khan went down to help, enjoying hunting Tyrannids for sport. With his sword. It seemed madness to me, but perhaps the best of humanity were that good. I still couldn't touch even Raffen and Spars, not to mention Ludvius or the good Master of Blades. "Mind if we join the fun, Master Lancefire?" a familiar voice asked from the Vox channel. Hey, I was so focused on the surface I ignored the orbit for a bit. "Brother Cossiel, I see you brought an entire company with you," I exclaimed in surprise, while checking the contents of that barge. My own sons in the Blood Angels chapter, all clad in Terminator armor and armed to the teeth. And lead by Captain Aphale, like he promised. "You don't need my permission, brother. I'm not even a real Astartes," I quipped back in a joking voice. "Forgive him, brother, for his idiocy is without bounds. Are you going to sit on that bridge, or fight beside your sons, Lord Pef?" Captain Aphale intervened in a sterner voice. I sighed inward, feeling the pain of Commissar Kane for myself now. "Let's take that tundra region, above the last Cadian regiment. I'll bring my good armor suit for the occasion." Reason, my knight, was feeling a bit lonely, even with Felicia oiling his joints every day. And I could practice those fancy blade moves in real combat. Damn it, I was becoming an idiot like everyone else in this crazy universe. I first directed a drop cruiser to secure a landing zone, while a squadron of Fury interceptors took station above the tundra. Damn winged bugs could ruin your day if you were not careful. Then I gathered my bodyguards, and 100 armed sentinels in a few dropships and descended onto the surface of Jolliffe, with a few wings of gunships as a vanguard. Passing through thick smoke from burning fields and houses, we began our landing approach just a few minutes after the drop pods, descending in a pandemonium of teeth and claws, while the tarantula turrets were butchering millions of tyranids, gorging on lichens and grass and even soil. Well, I guess there would be roots and worms and bacteria of every kind inside the soil. As soon as the ramp lowered and we started emerging from the dropships, the tyranids suddenly perked up and began rushing towards us. Reason's autosenses targeted a smaller organism for some reason, but I wasn't going to argue with my machine spirit. Surely the Mechanicus had studied this enemy and matched priority targeting accordingly. The volcano lance flared with impossible brightness, evaporating that target, and 100 other creatures beside and behind it. And then the secondaries began firing automatically, and I pushed towards the largest swarm, and began slicing with the power glaive. This time it worked. Every single strike butchered dozens of tyranids, while the flare shield blocked most of the incoming spits and spines and whatever other projectile weapons. Each time the lance was recharged, the knight would target yet another innocuous creature, and then urged me forward to capitalize on the stunned tyranids disoriented from losing their synaptic leader. Then I slashed, pivoted and slashed again, every strike eerily accurate and deadly. I felt like a sword master, dancing on the battlefield, not a mere pretender with out-of-context knowledge. Hours later, I remembered I wasn't alone on this tundra, and urged Reason to return and check on my comrades. My sons were simply walking slowly, in a kilometer-wide line, and exterminating whatever escaped from my dash across the tundra, followed by the sentinels watching over them from twice the height and shooting las cannons as distant targets, or burning corpses with their flamers. "Thank you for leaving something for us to do, Lord Lancefire," I heard Brother Cassiel joke and saw him wave at my knight as I approached. "Hey guys. Knights are very fun," I explained without saying anything. "Hey Dad. You were amazing. Do you think I could get a knight suit like yours?" I heard Jonas plead on a different Vox channel. Soon, all my kids were begging for a knight suit and awesome weapons. "Perhaps a couple, one day. They won't really work for boarding actions, or sneaky missions," I answered after a few seconds. Reason's machine spirit disagreed, and promised we could sneak about if we really tried. I highly doubted that. The lance strikes were visible from orbit. Afterwards, we proceeded at a slow power walk, and simply cleaned out every enemy we could find, until we crossed the entire tundra and reached the Cadian Armor Regiment. General Ven was waiting on top of a Macarius tank, and wasn't so sour anymore. "You even have a knight, Lord Lancefire?" she asked to make sure. "Why? It was a gift. And it does a good job in the field," I explained in a childish voice. "And it has a very long lance too." The general quipped and patted the volcano lance of her Macarius tank. "All right guys. We rest here for a while, and then trek the planet clockwise. If we move fast enough, we'll be done in a single day," I joked and opened the knight's cockpit to get some air. It was freezing, because tundra, and smelled of burned meat. "I bet my tanks will move faster," the old woman replied as Hacadian soldiers cheered. It felt like a picnic, at the edge of the galaxy. Soon enough, I rushed inside the command tank to get some food and a cup of CF, and stood to hear the general complain about her Lord Commander of Spite and how bad it was. Well, I couldn't steal an armor regiment, as those were fewer and more valued by the Imperium. But an experienced general was good too. "If you want, I can conscript you and some of your staff to my auxiliaries. We have 20 Doomhammers and 500 Hydras per regiment, and will soon receive 100 Macarius." I began my argument, a bit timidly. "Yes. Dear Emperor, I thought I would have to fuck you to escape from that idiot, Lord Lancefire," the grisly woman proclaimed in a breathless rush. I nodded cautiously. "We'd have to get you back to youth, but that's not a real problem. Sister Letitia over there is over 70, and looks young and pretty now. And I'm even older than you, I guess." The general glanced at my face in disbelief. "I'll be 200 next year," the old soldier explained in a serious voice. Well, she did have a wealth of experience then, and took some rejuvenate treatment. "Still not a problem, dear lady. That blood angel, Brother Cassiel, is over 10,000 years old, and he used to rub elbows with Sanguinius. Good genes help," I said with a smirk, and laid back on the leather seat, which smelled new. Well, this tank was brand new. Well, I guess it's possible. Primarch Khan is same age and looks rather fit too. I heard he was scouting Kimura for that great raid. And he didn't stay on ice like Guilliman. She mused and sipped some CF in a thoughtful voice. She wasn't exactly wrong, but I wouldn't shatter her illusions. Primarchs are rather special though. So, you'd like to become a Lamenter troop commander? We do fight a lot though. Sometimes at bad odds. I explained in a gentle voice. War is my profession, my lord. But Astartes auxiliaries have different regulations than the Imperial Guard. Not sure what they are. General Van said in an unasked question. That depends on each chapter, their Primarch and the legacy they carry. Psychers and sorcerers for Magnus, swordsmen and harassing attacks for Khan, dotting every line and sheer brutality for Ultramarines. I personally prefer air power as the main weapon for my chapter auxiliary. Static positions for my infantry and enveloping maneuvers for armor. The Battle Brothers sent in for boarding ships or boss killing, and other precision strikes. Not that I have any lamenters to deploy yet, I said a sadder voice. I heard about the Badab War. Must have been horrible, battling traitor space marines, she said in a compassionate voice. Yes and no. Those lamenters were flawed, like many successors of Sanguinius. Going mad with rage and bloodthirst, howling and biting their enemies and allies alike. They call these flaws the Black Rage and the Red Thirst. Also, quite unstoppable until they fell dead. Those battle barges were filled with dismembered corpses, some of them still gripping flesh in their teeth, even in death. I exposed in a grieving voice. They were still my brothers, dead as they were now. Ludvius coughed discreetly at the door, perhaps to admonish me. But his chapter had a death company too, mad and sent to one last battle, not expected to survive. But it won't happen anymore, right? Surely you can fix the problem? The old general asked, maybe too hopeful. I'm working on that, dear general. It's hard work, but I won't shy away from duty. Well, I guess you'll find out when we return to our base in the Fringe. I replied in a teasing tone, then walked past her to return to my knight. These Tyranids won't die by themselves, and I could use some target practice. Took an entire month to clean the planet of insectal invaders from outside the galaxy, because they were like cockroaches, spawning someplace else just when we thought they were gone. Back at the main starport, Margus Stanimvir was loading his STC fragments into a gun cutter that would lift them into orbit, but he possibly misplaced the memory unit with his research. Certainly, with all those fragments in his possession, he should be able to research everything again, and even faster. I detached a dozen corvettes to escort his explorer Arch Mechanicus to the warp limit, and bid him farewell. The ingrate tech priest did not ever bother to reply. What can you do? Except disseminate that research to 20 Forge worlds and steal away his glory. Beside that. Soon after, we had to rush and help out at Karak Prime, after conscripting some troops other local regiments to replenish manpower losses. This was a much larger tendril, but we also had more regiments and ships available, as more and more local chapters and Navy warships gathered to repel the threat. I wasn't able to walk on the surface in my huge knight suit, being too busy commanding the fleet and holding millions of bioships at bay. The hive cities were ordered to mobilize en masse, and I sent most tech priests and servitors to establish extra layers of fixed defenses, from duracrete walls and bunkers to armored gates protected with drum flails, and even gigantic flamers pumping arcs of burning promethium kilometers away. We also scoured the underhives for gangers and criminals, and had them gassed with soporifics, then imprinted with crude loyalty mnemonics and sent out to fight for the Emperor. These conscripts were not well armed, but that wasn't the real purpose. Metal shields and spears, or even cheap autoguns and stubbers didn't quite work against the Tyranids, but they did hold them in place, enough for artillery and aviation to bombard the packed masses of Tyranids, while the escorts lanced the more distant hordes from orbit. And with the hive cities slightly less inhabited and violent, they could focus more efforts on external defense. They had no other choice but fight or die. Entire PDF regiments were raised in a single week, given minimal training and sent atop of walls or manning the bunkers, only to return battered and needing a complete rebuild by the next week. Governors needed to be encouraged or publicly executed, weapon caches made available freely, or under protest, adeptus arbids conscripted as commissars to maintain discipline. In the end, we didn't lose a single city, although casualties exceeded 20% of the entire population. Over 2 billion people, giving their lives for the Emperor. The surface of the planet was left even more barren and polluted, but at least the hive cities were set in order, and even became more productive and profitable. Turns out having a few thousand tech priests repairing old reactors and factories, as well as reducing crime and population pressure, was quite beneficial. For my efforts, I loaded 5 million young women working in various factories and a few thousand scribes aboard a fleet of troop transports and had them sent to the fringe, mostly on 100 jungle and forest worlds that needed population growth and industrial production. They will have fresh air and natural food there, plus plenty of living space, not 10 in a single room. Sure, the Katakans will need to protect them, but they wouldn't mind being gifted 10 wives each. Population will grow fast after this, but those kids will be locals and raised with slightly different rules. Meanwhile, the star system was slowly being cleaned of dead husks of bioships and drifting winged bugs, only this time we cut off some of the larger bioships' teeth and claws, because those bones were strong enough to bite into starship armor. I was also out of munitions already, after a single year of constant fighting a small Tyrannid hive fleet. So, I left Captain Aphael in command of the Moloch Crusade, to find and finish off the remaining Tyrannid splinters, and I sailed for home. Of course, my dear Inquisitor Vale had to stay and oversee the project for the sake of her career, and I took her baby home with me. We named him Aeneas, like the mythical hero. He now sleeps on top of Canis, beside a young puppy sired by my wolf. Woo? My wolf asks as he saw me leave the nursery. Yes, Canis. Going back to make more puppies, I explained patiently as Canis licked both of his young ones. The wolf nodded wisely, then glanced at my left glove. Perhaps later, you smart friend. I did need to sort out those sisters of battle, one way or the other. My new drop cruisers were left behind in the galactic north, because being able to intervene rapidly with drop pods would be extremely helpful and will save countless lives. Once the Moloch Crusade would be declared finished, the light cruisers commanded by my daughters will return home, after visiting a forge world each, to spread out more STC dataslates and Picton sensors logs of the turret drop results. The Mechonicus tech priests were not stupid and will realize rapidly the advantages of this new doctrine. I didn't have much hope with the Imperial Navy or the Astrum Militarum, as I rarely saw any of my templates deployed in the field. Some night vision sensors, recon units with cheap weasels, and sometimes the new manticores and hydras. In such small quantities they wouldn't impact much, except perhaps keep the regiment commanders a bit safer. However, Commissar Kane did not disappoint, and he made himself a big hero again by discovering a large gene-stealer cult on Isis V, then leading the troops into a grinding civil war which resulted in a costly victory. I bet Kane is glad for his relic sword now, as well as his new power armor and shield. Perhaps even more happy with his tough but loyal Katakan all-female bodyguards. And funny enough, his former aide Jurgen was totally admired by the Katakan women I assigned to him, for being a real man, smelly and rough. I began to doubt the wisdom of trying to breed Origin females, as those would surely have even stronger taste in men. I wouldn't give up until I tried a few times, just for variety's sake. In the meantime, I did have plenty of Norse women to pick and choose, or let Regina pick and choose for me. The new armor specialist, Rayla_Van, was even a greater treasure, especially after testing my special relic sword on a dozen captured orcs and regaining a slightly more youthful appearance. My lord, is this type of weapon common among Astartes? Rayla asked while examining herself in the mirror, with a confused but amazed face. She even got naked just to see everything was in the right place. And Rayla had great forms, even if I saw little from my chair. Not common at all, General. They're called ancient relics for reason. I explained patiently. I see, so it is a great honor to even be allowed to use it once. And I suppose, you returned my body to youth, so you can fuck me, like you do with all those Valhallan women? Rayla guessed at random, and emerged from the shower to parade her young body in front of me and Canis. Damn cock tease. Well, I wouldn't say no if she offered, but she did not, so that was it. Instead, I smiled thinly and shrugged. I need your mind and experience, my dear General. As for making babies, that is a more complicated and involved procedure. Even if we both wanted to, my nurses and apothecaries and the biologist tech priests have to conduct a whole battery of tests and scans. I told you how dangerous Astartes gene seed is. My new general sighed as if I missed the point. Just get naked and lie on the bed, Pef Lancefire. I need to test my new body, and there's nobody else here I can trust. I blinked in confusion, while Canis just sighed and turned on the other side, probably amazed at my idiocy. Ralph just grinned and held his thumb up for luck. All right then. I could be lucky sometimes. So I got out of my armor and laid in bed, and allowed Rayla to test her young body, in every manner she could think of. Guess I now have a general concubine to oversee the other guards' women. And perhaps a wife, should the others agree to this. When our small warpless fleet arrived at Sutha, we found it under attack again, by more orcs. I wasn't surprised and just led the battleship forward to defend the Aegida fortress, while the carriers began launching the corvettes and the starfighters. In void combat the orcs were somewhat easy to defeat, even using conventional methods, but these orcs had figured out a way to weaponize teleporter and launched Gretchens and orc boys as boarders and even as destructive ordnance, since a Gretchen materializing inside an energy conduit or a targeting cogitator did damage just by breaking down the expensive machinery. Of course, they have not considered teleporting bombs and warheads, nor being teleported themselves into my tesseract. Soon enough, 3 orc terror ships and 22 cruisers vanished in flares on Nova mines, although the mines still targeted flocks of orc space fighters and boarding boats. And imagine my surprise to find a working fragment of an STC on the largest orc cruiser, something to do with teleportarium technology. The orcs were surely crazy and lucky enough to repurpose that ancient machine into something they could use for a war. Possibly a mass transit system for a spaceport during the dark age of technology. I already was planning how to weaponize this discovery for my own use, for example for quick torpedo reloads and teleporting turrets on the ground, or even inside enemy ships. Just place teleport beacons on the weapons, and they could be even retrieved afterwards, without using time and fuel for landers and dropships. Sadly, the research and testing for this project would take a few decades, even for a larger forged world. Anyway, my Rose wasn't back on Sutha yet, but her own blonde infanticide lady was, with a whole store of Tau databases and weapon research slates. I will need 3 copies of that data, my dear. I asked in a polite voice. But I didn't need to remain polite, if Calixa didn't cooperate. The blonde assassin measured me with obvious uncertainty. The Inquisitor asked that everything that I recovered to be sealed. Sorry, Lord Lancefire. I sighed inward, then stepped closer, nearly touching her with my armored chestplate. We are on the same team, Calixa. Or do I need to take out my rosette? I asked softly and tapped the null box suggestively. Don't do that, my lord. Clavis engrams will play havoc with my neural modules and I'll be rather incapacitated for a week. Why do you need 3 copies? The infocyte grumbled as she took our 3 data stacks and began downloading the data from her encrypted MIU. My own infocyte agent needs a copy, Forge Retribution needs 1, and the third, well, the third will go way over your pay grade. The big powers will want to take a look, and that might be my ticket for a High Lord seat. You know, the one being arranged for the rogue traders? I whispered in a secretive voice. I didn't know, my lord. So, are we friends now? The cute assassin asked in a failed attempt at seduction. Already seeing herself riding on the parade, unholy terror. Then again, a cute infocyte? I could use another, in every way. Backups were only natural, in case something went wrong. I snapped my fingers to produce an Obsidian Augury's security tag. This obsidian plate will grant you extra access, should you be in dire need. I explained in a soft whisper, right into her ear. Calixa hugged my arm and examined the credit card wafer with 100 tiny Auspex sensors, finding nothing to indicate advanced technology. Except perhaps the blackstone rim, which kept the obsidian from cracking or flaking. But I wasn't an infocyte to track data, or a psyker to track psychic imprints. Simply the memory of this object would allow me to locate it anywhere in range of the Pharos, or in range of the sounding board if needed. I expect the Blackstone is meant to prevent psychers from detecting this ID card? Or is it something else? She mused softly, voice trembling a bit with excitement. We'll discuss the rest in private. I explained and made her vanish in my labyrinth. Best way to extract someone from an Inquisition's fortress. I wasn't like I would carry a woman on my back, if she fit in my pocket. But first, I had to check on Mr. Trzin, and the new warpless drive. I did pay for it in advance, after all. And of course, to recover the few lamenters still part of the Death Watch, which had just arrived at the fortress, during the time I was away. Amadeus Chirophiles, now known as Chiron, was a space_marine_dreadnought, with millennia of experience, while veteran brother Semnai was the only combat-capable lamenter remaining to my chapter. I didn't count the support staff as battle brothers, even if they could technically fight. I needed their knowledge and experience, not an extra gun. Experience regarding galactic lore, Xenos races, plagues and chaos demons or tactics. The lamenters have traveled all over the galaxy, and knew lots and lots of secrets, hidden routes and meeting places, webway portals and forgotten ship graveyards. They didn't even know how valuable their knowledge was, and I wouldn't tell them. I just downloaded all the ship logs, and had the auxiliary crew or the senior lamenters retell each and every encounter, when and where a certain sighting has occurred, who was present, what else was in the system and so on. Sadly, most of the old astropaths had died, as they were never meant to last long. But we had the navigators, which was almost as good. Sure, they saw in remembered events in a haze of temporal currents and prophetic dreams, but they would know the routes back. It was their job after all. You don't look and feel like a lamenter, Master Lancefire. Brother Semnai told me straight to my face. My angelic face. I just sighed and snapped my fingers, storing him inside the Tesseract as well. Hopefully he'll get better, once he was on the Starfleet and among other, real lamenters. Venerable Brother Chiron did not grumble or care I wasn't a proper lamenter, instead being glad of having found his way back to the beloved chapter. We must be in a sorry state, if one such as yourself is now chapter master. I feared nobody was left alive after that disastrous Badab war. The half-dead lamenter lamented in a pitiful tone, and you could sense his sadness pouring out of the armored shell. Canis smelled the towering coffin on legs and mewed back at me in confusion. Yes, Canis. Chiron is one of us, so don't bite him. I quipped in a cheerful voice, and patted the robot on the side. Come with me, Chiron, we're teleporting down. I explained in my next breath, and started walking towards the teleportarium. 2 squads of scythes and executioners dressed in black armor stood guard at the entrance, and one of them stepped forward to block my way. Nobody may access the Pharos, not even you, Master Lancefire. The Death Watch proclaimed grimly, and raised his combi bolter towards me. Oh well, I guess we'll have more temporal anomalies today. As the squads vanished in my labyrinth, I took out the cog-shaped rosette and began unlocking the teleport safeties. That is a good trick, Master Lancefire. And even the rosette is genuine. Chiron praised me in a slightly surprised tone. I just nodded, and patted Canis, making him vanish too. Teleporting was bad for his stomach after all. In a violet flash of warp and madness, we emerged inside the Pharos, to find it cleaned up completely. No more Astartes oaths and canticles, no more battle flags and purity seals. Just black walls and an intact Catan, slightly crucified on the wall with chains of living stone. This must have been Amberley's work, trying to appease the alien god somehow. Pef Lancefire. You have saved me again. The Catan shard spoke in a booming voice. This was unexpected. The Catan seemed glad to see me. Hello again, mighty Zorhulash. What do you, the teleporting orcs? I see. I realized after a second. Those cretin greenskins would have ruined plenty of things with a Catan as a slave. Probably half the galaxy or something. The orcs knew about me, Pef Lancefire. And they also had the means to reach me down here. Not an accident. The Catan concluded as a warning. Some damn Eldar farseer, most likely. When in doubt, blame the Eldar, and you won't be far from the truth. I turned towards the dreadnought and pointed towards the god shard. This person is Zorhulash, a shard of the potentate. Xenospecies Catan, destructive Abelites about the same with the Segmentum battlefleet. Also immortal and extremely loyal. Explained while returning the sounding board to its dais and releasing the protective stasis field. Catan, I know of them. deceitful, lies and even aiding the Necrons in combat. The Death Watch lost many teams to his kind. Chiron rumbled from within his coffin. Zorhulash wanted to say something, before glancing down in sadness. Mostly true, Chiron. The Necrons broke them, and enslaved them as weapons. But there are a few still free, and causing mayhem for their own pleasure. What's that Catan's name, mighty Zorhulash? The Deceiver? I asked as a data stick appeared in my hand. A database of Tau technology, which should aid Trazyn in his task. Mephetron. Yes, that is the Deceiver you ask about, Peflancefire. There are at least 6 of his shards still free, traveling the galaxy and causing mayhem and strife. It shames me to be of same race as that creature. The ancient Catan divulged in obvious sorrow. Well then. A new trade deal sounded wonderful.